The lights in the recreation room of the warship Nexus Prime flickered as hundreds of alien soldiers crowded around the large viewing screens. The air buzzed with excitement and strange sounds from dozens of different species. Some clicked their tongues, others made humming noises, and a few released small puffs of colored gas when they were happy. Commander Zektar stood at the front of the room, his massive reptilian frame casting a shadow over the crowd. His scales were dark green with yellow markings that showed his high rank in the Vorthic military. Behind him, Lieutenant Neith floated in the air, her crystal body catching the light from the screens and throwing rainbows across the walls. "Soldiers of the Coalition," Zektar's voice boomed through the room. "Tomorrow we finish what we started 3 months ago. Tomorrow we take Earth." The crowd erupted in cheers and war cries from a dozen different worlds. The Kelran warriors, tall and thin with 4 arms each, tapped their weapons against the floor in rhythm. The Keth made a low humming sound that grew louder and louder until it filled the room. Even the normally quiet luminar beings pulsed with brighter light. "But first," Zektar continued, raising one clawed hand for silence, "let us remember what we are fighting. Let us look at the pathetic creatures who call themselves humans." Lieutenant Nith pressed something on her control panel, and the screens came alive with images from Earth. The aliens watched as scenes from human movies and shows played before them. Warriors in shining armor fought dragons. Men and women in colorful costumes flew through the air. Heroes lifted cars over their heads and ran faster than vehicles. The laughter started slowly, then grew until it echoed off the metal walls. A young Vorthic soldier pointed at the screen where a human actor was pretending to throw lightning bolts. "Look at that one. He thinks he controls the sky. And this one," called out a Keth drone, its hive mind voice speaking for thousands of others. "This human believes he can move mountains with his bare hands." Nith changed the display to show more human entertainment. Ancient Greek heroes battled monsters. Norse gods swung massive hammers. Human soldiers fought impossible odds and won through sheer determination. Each new image brought fresh waves of laughter from the alien crowd. "These humans," Zektar said, his voice dripping with amusement, "they create these fantasies because they know how weak they really are. They dream of being strong because they never can be." A Kelran officer, her 4 arms gesturing wildly, spoke up. "Commander, I studied their history files. They actually believe their ancestors could do these things. They think some humans really had the strength of 10 men. Ridiculous," laughed a luminar being, its light pulsing bright yellow with humor. "Their strongest specimens can barely lift half their body weight. My species absorbs more energy in a single day than their entire planet produces in a year." The mockery continued as alien after alien shared what they had learned about human culture. They found it hilarious that humans told stories about heroes who could fight for days without rest. They laughed at tales of warriors who could carry weapons heavier than themselves. They thought it was the funniest thing in the galaxy that humans believed in gods who could control the weather. "Tell them about the one called Hercules," Zektar ordered. NYTH. The crystal being's form sparkled with amusement as she pulled up images of the ancient Greek hero. According to human mythology, this Hercules could kill a lion with his bare hands. He could hold up the entire sky. He completed 12 impossible tasks that would challenge even our best technology. The room exploded with laughter again. Group of Keth drones began making jokes about how many humans it would take to lift a small rock. The Vorthic soldiers started competing to see who could come up with the most ridiculous human myth. "What about Thor?" asked a young Kelran warrior. "They say he could control lightning and thunder with a hammer." "And there's one called Achilles," added a luminar. "Supposedly he was almost impossible to kill and could defeat entire armies alone." "Don't forget their modern heroes," Zektar said, switching the display to show human comic books and movies. "They dream of flying without wings, of seeing through walls, of being faster than light itself." The alien soldiers could barely contain themselves. Some were laughing so hard they had to lean against the walls for support. Others were making jokes in their own languages that sent their companions into fits of giggles. In the back of the room, almost hidden by the crowd, stood a human. Captain Jake Morrison wore the gray uniform of a coalition prisoner, but his back was straight and his eyes were clear. He had been captured 3 months ago during the failed peace talks, and since then he had been forced to watch as the aliens prepared to destroy his homeworld. Jake listened to the laughter and felt something cold settle in his stomach. These beings saw humans as nothing more than weak, frightened animals who made up stories to feel better about themselves. They had no idea what they were really facing. The funniest part, continued a Vorthic intelligence officer, is that they still tell these stories to their children. They actually teach their young that humans can be heroes. It's almost sad, added Nith, her crystal body dimming slightly. They're so desperate to believe they're special that they create these impossible legends. Jake wanted to speak, to tell them they were wrong, but he knew it would only make things worse. These aliens had already decided that humans were weak. They had already made up their minds about what the coming battle would look like. The laughter continued as more and more human myths were displayed on the screens. The aliens saw stories of David defeating Goliath, of Samson bringing down a building, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when pushed to their limits. To them, it was all just proof of human weakness and desperation. "Look at this one," called out a Keth drone, pointing to a scene from a human war movie. "This human soldier claims he can fight for 3 days without sleep. Our weakest children could do better." "And here," added a Kelran officer, "they show a human lifting a vehicle to save someone trapped underneath. Even their own scientists say such a thing is impossible." The mockery went on for nearly an hour. Every human legend, every hero story, every myth about strength and courage was met with laughter and ridicule. The aliens were so confident in their superiority that they saw human culture as nothing more than entertainment, but in the corner of the room, a figure watched silently. General Vexthal had been alive for over 1,000 years. He had conquered more worlds than any other warrior in Coalition history. His name was known and feared across the galaxy. Unlike his troops, Vexthal was not laughing. His ancient eyes, which had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, were focused on the screens with an intensity that would have worried anyone who noticed. The general had been studying human culture for weeks, and what he had found disturbed him greatly. While his soldiers saw only primitive fantasies, he saw something else entirely. He saw patterns that reminded him of other species he had encountered, species that had surprised the Coalition in very unpleasant ways. As the laughter continued around him, Vexthal made a decision. Tomorrow, when they reached Earth, he would be watching very carefully. Something about these human myths bothered him, and in his long experience, when something bothered him, it usually meant trouble was coming. The recreation room slowly emptied, as the alien soldiers returned to their duties, still chuckling about human stupidity. But Jake Morrison remained where he was, and so did General Vexthal, both of them staring at the now dark screens and thinking very different thoughts about what tomorrow might bring. 3 months earlier, the space around Earth had been filled with fire and death. Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching as her fleet fought desperately against an enemy unlike anything humanity had ever faced. "Report?" she shouted over the sound of alarms and explosions. "We've lost the Endeavour and the Resolution," called out Lieutenant Commander Tony Brooks from his station. "The Titan is badly damaged and pulling back." Lisa gripped the railing as her ship shook from another impact. Through the massive viewing window, she could see the enemy fleet. Hundreds of alien ships, each one larger and more advanced than anything Earth had ever built. They moved with perfect coordination, their weapons cutting through human defenses like paper. "Admiral," said her communications officer, "Captain Morrison is requesting permission to attempt diplomatic contact." Lisa looked at the tactical display. The human fleet was losing badly. In less than an hour, they would be completely destroyed. Maybe talking was their only chance. "Tell him he's cleared for approach," she said. "God help us all." The diplomatic ship Phoenix broke away from the main fleet and moved toward the alien formation. On board, Captain Jake Morrison sat in the captain's chair, knowing this might be humanity's last hope for survival. "Are you sure about this, Captain?" asked Amy Rodriguez, his communications specialist. She was young, barely out of the academy, but she was one of the best language experts in the fleet. "No," Jake admitted, "but we have to try." Beside them, Ben Hamilton checked his equipment one more time. As a cultural attaché, his job was to help avoid misunderstandings that could lead to war. Unfortunately, it looked like the war had already. STARTED, Dr. Elena Vasquez, the team's anthropologist, was studying the alien ships through the sensors. "Their formation suggests a highly organized society," she said. "Multiple species working together. This isn't just one alien race, it's an entire alliance." The Phoenix moved closer to the alien fleet, broadcasting messages of peace in every language and mathematical sequence they could think of. For a moment, it seemed like the shooting had stopped. Then everything went wrong. The alien ships surrounded the Phoenix before anyone could react. Strange beams of light washed over the diplomatic vessel, and Jake felt his consciousness slipping away. The last thing he remembered was Amy's voice screaming his name. When Jake woke up, he was lying on a cold metal floor in a room that hurt to look at. The walls seemed to shift and change color, and the air tasted like electricity. Standing over him was something that might have been a nightmare brought to life. The creature was tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished metal. Its eyes were too large for its face, and when it spoke, its voice came from everywhere. "At once, you are the human diplomatic representative," it said. It wasn't a question. "I am Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Forces," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I was attempting to establish peaceful communication." Peaceful. The aliens seemed to taste the word. "Your species attacked our scout ships. We were defending ourselves. Your ships entered our space without permission." The alien made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your space? How interesting. You claim ownership of a small region around a single star, yet you know nothing of the galaxy beyond." Jake was moved to a holding area where he found the rest of his team. Amy was scared but unhurt. Ben was unconscious but breathing. Dr. Vasquez was already trying to study their captors, taking notes on everything she could see. "What do they want?" Amy whispered. "I don't know," Jake replied. "But they're not just one species. I've seen at least 5 different types of aliens since I woke up." Over the following days, the humans learned they were prisoners of something called the Galactic Coalition. It was an alliance of dozens of alien species that controlled most of the known galaxy. Earth had been marked for conquest, and the human resistance had only delayed the inevitable. The aliens were fascinated by their prisoners. They asked endless questions about human culture, history, and biology. They seemed particularly interested in human entertainment and mythology. "Why do you create stories about beings with impossible abilities?" asked Nith, the crystal alien who served as their main interrogator. "Your own science proves that such things cannot exist," Dr. Vasquez tried to explain. "These stories serve multiple purposes in human society. They teach moral lessons, preserve cultural memory, and inspire people to achieve greatness. But they are lies," Nith pointed out. "No human has ever possessed the strength of your Hercules or the speed of your Mercury. They're not meant to be literal truth," Elena explained. "They're symbolic representations of human potential and ideals." The aliens found this answer amusing. They had conquered hundreds of worlds, and they had never encountered a species that told itself such obvious falsehoods. To them, it was proof that humans were weak creatures who needed fantasy to cope with reality. The interrogations continued for weeks. The aliens wanted to know everything about human military capabilities, technology, and psychology. They were preparing for their final invasion, and they wanted to understand exactly what they were facing. Jake noticed that different alien species had different attitudes toward humans. The Vorthak, like Commander Zektar, saw humans as potential threats to be eliminated quickly. The Keth seemed to view humans as curiosities to be studied and catalogued. The Kelran were more interested in human tactics and strategy, But there was one alien who stood apart from the others. General Vexthal visited the human prisoners only once, but Jake never forgot the encounter. The ancient warrior moved differently than the other aliens. Where they seemed to float or glide, he walked with purpose. His eyes, which had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, studied the humans with an intensity that made Jake uncomfortable. "You are the diplomatic representative," Vexthal said, his voice carrying the weight of ages. "Yes, General," Jake replied. He had learned enough about coalition hierarchy to know that this being was extremely important. "Your species fascinates me," Vexthal continued. "Most conquered peoples either beg for mercy or rage against their fate. You do neither. What would be the point?" Jake asked. "Begging won't change your mind and anger won't help my people." "No," Vexthal agreed, "but hope might." The general studied Jake for a long moment. "Your people tell stories of heroes who face impossible odds and win through courage alone. Do you believe such things are possible?" Jake thought carefully before answering. "I believe that people can do extraordinary things when they have to. History is full of examples." "History," Vexthal repeated. "Yes, I have been studying your history." "Very interesting reading." The general turned to leave, then paused. "Tell me, Captain Morrison, do you think your myths and legends might be based on real events?" "Some of them, maybe," Jake said. "Stories. Change over time, but they usually start with something real." Vexthal nodded slowly. "Something real. Yes, that is what concerns me." After the general left, Amy moved closer to Jake. "What do you think he meant by that?" "I don't know," Jake admitted. "But I get the feeling he sees something in us that the others don't." The days passed and the aliens continued their preparations. They studied human culture with the same intensity they used to analyze weapons and defenses. They found human stories about heroes and gods particularly amusing. "Look at this," one of the Kauran officers said during a briefing that the humans were forced to attend. "They have a story about a human who could not be killed except in one specific place on his body." "And this one," added a Keth drone, "claims that a human could become stronger when he became angry." The aliens laughed at these stories, seeing them as proof of human weakness and desperation. They couldn't understand why a species would create tales about abilities they could never possess, but Dr. Vasquez tried to explain the deeper meaning. "These stories aren't just entertainment," she said. "They're cultural instructions. They tell us what we should strive to become." "But they're impossible," Nith pointed out. "No biological entity can possess such abilities." "Maybe not normally," Elena agreed. "But humans have always pushed beyond normal limits when they had to. Our stories remind us of that potential." The aliens found this explanation hilarious. They had studied human biology and found it to be average at best. Humans were neither the strongest nor the fastest species in the galaxy. They had no natural weapons or defenses. Their technology was primitive by coalition standards. As the weeks passed, Jake began to notice something troubling. The aliens were becoming overconfident. They saw humans as weak, frightened creatures who made up stories to feel better about themselves. They had no respect for human capabilities or determination. Jake tried to warn them that they were making a mistake, but his words only brought more laughter. The aliens had decided that humans were harmless and nothing would change. Their minds died all except General Vexthal. The ancient warrior continued to study human culture and history with growing concern. While his troops prepared for an easy victory, he was beginning to suspect that the coalition might be walking into a trap of their own making. The final invasion was scheduled to begin in just a few days. The alien fleet would return to Earth and finish what they had started. They expected to find a broken, demoralized world ready to surrender. Jake hoped they were wrong. The coalition fleet moved through space like a massive steel storm, hundreds of ships heading toward Earth for the final invasion. In the war room of the Nexus Prime, alien officers gathered around a holographic display showing their target world. Spinning slowly in the darkness, Commander Zektar stood at the center of the room, his reptilian features twisted into what might have been a smile. Around him, representatives from every major species in the coalition waited for the final briefing before battle. "In 6 hours we will arrive at the human homeworld," Zektar announced, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "Our scouts report that their defenses are even weaker than before. They have had 3 months to prepare, and they have accomplished nothing." The alien officers laughed and clicked their approval. A Kelran tactical officer raised one of her 4 arms. "Commander, what about the human fleet that escaped our first attack?" "Destroyed or scattered," Zektar replied confidently. "Our intelligence shows that Admiral Carter's remaining ships are hiding in the outer system. They pose no threat to our operation." Lieutenant Nith floated forward, her crystal body reflecting the light from the holographic display. "Sir, I have prepared a final analysis of human psychology for the troops. With your permission, I would like to share it." Zektar nodded, and the display changed to show images from human culture. Movies, books, paintings, and sculptures filled the air around them. The alien officers immediately began to chuckle as they recognized the familiar scenes of human mythology. "As you can see," Nith began, "humans continue to comfort themselves with impossible fantasies. Even now, as we approach their world, they are probably telling each other stories about heroes who will save them." A young Vorthak officer pointed at an image of a human warrior fighting a dragon. "Look at that one. He thinks he can defeat a creature 10 times his size with a metal stick." "And this," added a Keth drone, highlighting a painting of a human lifting a massive stone block, "shows their complete ignorance of physics and biology." The laughter grew louder as more images appeared: Greek gods throwing lightning bolts, Norse warriors battling giants, modern superheroes flying through the air without any visible means of propulsion. To the aliens, it was all proof that humans were delusional creatures who preferred fantasy to reality. "The most amusing part," Nith continued, "is that they actually believe these stories have some basis in truth. They teach their children that ordinary humans can become heroes through courage and determination." "Pathetic," sneered a luminar being, its light pulsing with contempt. "They cannot accept their own limitations, so they create myths about transcending them." Commander Zektar gestured toward the back of the room where Jake Morrison stood under guard. "Perhaps our human prisoner would like to explain his species' strange relationship with reality?" All eyes turned to Jake, who had been forced to attend these briefings as part of what the aliens called his educational experience. He looked around the room at faces that ranged from merely amused to openly hostile. "You still don't understand," Jake said quietly. The laughter stopped. Zektar's expression grew dangerous. "Understand what, human?" Jake took a deep breath. He knew he was taking a risk, but he couldn't stay silent anymore. "You think our myths are just stories we tell ourselves to feel better? You think they're proof that we're weak and desperate, aren't they?" asked Nith, her crystal form flickering with curiosity. "No," Jake replied firmly. "They're instruction manuals." The alien officers looked at each other in confusion. A Kelran tactical specialist leaned forward. "Instruction manuals. For what?" "For what we become when we have to," Jake explained. "Every story about impossible strength, every legend about heroes who wouldn't quit, every myth about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, they're all based on something real." "Real?" Zektar laughed harshly. "You expect us to believe that your ancestors could actually perform superhuman feats? I expect you to understand that humans have always been capable of more than they appear," Jake said. "Your own intelligence files must have examples. Humans lifting cars to save trapped victims. Soldiers fighting for days without food or sleep. People surviving injuries that should have killed them. Isolated incidents," dismissed a Keth drone. "Temporary adrenaline responses with no tactical significance. Are they?" Jake asked. "Or are they glimpses of what humans can do when pushed to their absolute limits?" The room fell silent. The aliens were no longer laughing. Something in Jake's voice, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before, made them uncomfortable. "You're saying that human mythology is tactical intelligence?" asked a Kelran officer, her forearms twitching nervously. I'm saying that when you corner a human, when you threaten everything they care about, when you push them past the point where normal responses work, something changes, Jake replied. The stories about Hercules and Achilles and Thor aren't fantasies, they're warnings. Commander Zektar was about to respond when a voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. The human speaks the truth. Every being in the room turned to see General Vexthal stepping out of the shadows. The ancient warrior's presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Even Zektar, for all his arrogance, showed respect for the coalition's greatest military mind. General, Zektar said carefully, surely you don't believe in human fairy tales? Vexthal moved to the center of the room, his ancient eyes studying the faces around him. I have been alive for over 1,000 years, he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. I have conquered more worlds than any warrior in coalition history. I have seen the rise and fall of civilizations across the galaxy. The room was completely silent now. Even the ship's engines seemed to quiet as the general spoke. In all that time, I have learned one fundamental truth about warfare, Vexthal continued. The most dangerous enemy is not the one with the best weapons or the strongest armor. The most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to accept defeat. He gestured toward the holographic display, which still showed images of human heroes and legends. What you see as primitive mythology, I recognize as something far more dangerous. These are not stories about what humans wish they could be. These are memories of what they have already done. General, with respect, Zektar began, but Vexthal cut him off with a look. I have spent the last 3 months studying human history, the general announced. Not their entertainment, not their culture, but their actual military records, their documented battles and conflicts, their reports of individual combat performance under extreme conditions. The alien officers shifted uncomfortably. They had spent their time laughing at human movies and myths. None of them had bothered to study actual human warfare. During what humans call their Second World War, Vexthal continued, a single human soldier named Audie Murphy climbed onto a burning tank destroyer and held off an entire enemy company for over an hour. He was wounded, outnumbered 50-1, and using a weapon that was literally on fire. Yet he refused to retreat. The room was so quiet that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Another human, John Basalone, defended a position against 3,000 enemy soldiers for 3 consecutive days during what they call the Battle of Henderson Field. He had no sleep, minimal food, and was vastly outnumbered. When his weapons overheated from constant use, he continued fighting with his bare hands. Those are exceptional cases, Illuminar being protested weakly. Are they? Vexthal asked. Human military history is filled with such examples. Soldiers who fought on after losing limbs. Pilots who completed impossible missions in damaged aircraft. Individuals who carried wounded comrades for miles through enemy territory. The general paused, letting his words sink in. What you call myths, I call battle reports. What you dismiss as fantasy, I recognize as tactical doctrine. The humans do not create stories about heroes because they are weak. They create them because they remember what their species is capable of when survival is at stake. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had hoped that someone would finally understand what humanity really was, but hearing it from the Coalition's greatest warrior was both encouraging and terrifying. General, Nith said, her crystal form flickering with uncertainty, are you suggesting that we should be concerned about the human response to our invasion? Vexthal turned to look at her, and for the first time since Jake had met him, the ancient warrior's expression showed something that might have been fear. I am suggesting, Vexthal replied slowly, that we may have made a grave error in judgment. We have not been preparing to conquer a weak species. We have been preparing to fight a race of potential heroes. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time since the invasion began, the aliens looked uncertain. The confidence that had carried them across the galaxy suddenly seemed fragile. What do you recommend, General? Zektar asked, his voice much quieter than before. Vexthal looked around the room at the faces of his fellow warriors. I recommend that we prepare for a battle unlike any we have ever fought. And I recommend that we hope we are strong enough to win it. As the alien officers filed out of the briefing room, their laughter replaced by worried whispers, Jake remained behind with his guards. He had seen something in General Vexthal's eyes that gave him hope. The briefing room on the Nexus Prime had never been so quiet. After General Vexthal's shocking revelation, the alien officers sat in stunned silence. The confidence that had filled the room just minutes before was gone, replaced by uncertainty and growing fear. Commander Zektar was the first to speak. General, surely you cannot be serious. These humans are primitive creatures. We defeated their entire fleet in a single battle. Vexthal moved to the holographic display and waved his hand. The images of human mythology disappeared, replaced by data files and military reports. That is exactly what concerns me, Commander. We won too easily. The display showed the battle from 3 months ago. Human ships fighting desperately against overwhelming odds, taking damage that should have destroyed them instantly, yet continuing to fight long after any rational species would have surrendered. Look at this vessel, Vexthal pointed to the image of a human destroyer. It lost main power, life support, and weapon systems. By all logic, the crew should have abandoned ship. Instead, they rammed one of our cruisers. Lieutenant Nith's crystal form flickered nervously. That was desperation, General. A final act of a defeated enemy. Was it? Vexthal asked. He changed the display again, showing more footage from the battle. This human frigate continued firing even after its hull was breached in 17 places. This corvette carried wounded crew members to safety while under direct fire from 3 of our ships. The alien officers watched the scenes play out on the holographic display. They had seen these images before, but they had interpreted them differently then. What they had dismissed as desperate acts by a dying species, General Vexthal was presenting as evidence of something far more dangerous. General, said a Kauran tactical officer, her forearms twitching with nervous energy, what exactly are you suggesting? Vexthal turned away from the display to face the assembled officers. I am suggesting that we have been studying the wrong intelligence. While you have been laughing at human entertainment, I have been analyzing their actual combat performance. He waved his hand again, and the display filled with new information. Charts, graphs, and statistics appeared in the air around them. In the past 50 years, human military forces have engaged in 847 separate conflicts on their homeworld. Do you know their casualty rates when defending their homes? The officers shook their heads. 12%, Vexthal said quietly. In conflicts where they were defending their families and homes, human forces suffered only 12% casualties before achieving victory. The galactic average for successful defensive operations is 38%. A young Vorthic officer raised his clawed hand. Perhaps they fought weaker enemies, General. That is what I thought as well, Vexthal replied. Until I studied the specifics. The display changed to show detailed battle reports. Time and again, human forces defeated enemies with superior numbers, better weapons, and advanced technology. They accomplished this through what their military calls force multiplication through morale enhancement. Commander Zektar leaned forward. What does that mean? It means, Jake Morrison said from where he stood under guard, that humans fight harder when they have something to protect. All eyes turned to the human prisoner. Vexthal nodded slowly. The human understands what his captors do not. Captain Morrison, would you care to explain? Jake looked around the room at the alien faces staring at him. For the first time since his capture, he felt like someone was actually listening to what he had to say. Our myths and legends aren't just stories, Jake began. They're reminders of what we're capable of when we have to be. Every human child grows up hearing about heroes who faced impossible odds and won through courage and determination. Fantasy, muttered a Keth drone, but its voice lacked the confidence it had shown earlier. No, Jake continued. Training. When a human is pushed to the edge, when everything they love is threatened, those stories become real. We don't just fight for victory. We fight because we remember what heroes are supposed to do, Vexthel nodded approvingly. The human speaks truth. I have found documentation of this phenomenon throughout their military history. He gestured, and the display showed a new set of files. During their Battle of Thermopylae, 300 Spartan warriors held off an army of 100,000 for 3 days. That's impossible, protested a luminar being. The battle is well documented, Vexthel replied. During their siege of Bastogne, surrounded American forces held their position against overwhelming German forces, despite being outnumbered and running out of supplies. When offered surrender, their commander replied with a single word. What? Word? Asked Nith. No, Jake said quietly. He said no. The room fell silent again. The simple words seemed to hang in the air like a challenge. Vexthel continued his presentation, showing example after example of human military achievements that seemed impossible by galactic standards. Small units holding against vastly superior forces, individual soldiers accomplishing feats that should have required entire companies, wounded warriors fighting on when any other species would have collapsed. Here, the general said, pointing to a particular report, a human soldier named Roy Benavides was shot multiple times, hit by shrapnel and bayoneted. Medical personnel declared him dead. 6 hours later, he was still fighting. He rescued 8 of his comrades before finally accepting medical treatment. The reports must be exaggerated, said a Kelran officer, but her voice was uncertain. That is what I thought, Vexthel admitted, until I cross-referenced them with photographic evidence, witness statements, and medical records. The humans do not exaggerate their military achievements. If anything, they understate them. The display changed to show images of human memorials and monuments, statues of soldiers, walls covered with names, eternal flames burning for the fallen. The aliens studied these images with growing unease. What are these? Asked Commander Zektar. They honor their warriors, Jake explained. Every human who dies in battle is remembered. Their names are carved in stone, their stories are told. To children, their sacrifices become part of our collective memory. Why? Asked Nith, her crystal form dimming with confusion. Because, Jake said, knowing that you will be remembered makes it easier to do impossible things. When a human warrior charges into hopeless odds, he knows that his story will inspire others to do the same. Vexthel nodded. This is what your intelligence analysis missed, Commander. Human military doctrine is not based on tactics or technology. It is based on the belief that any individual can become a hero if the situation demands it. That's insane, protested a Vorthic tactical specialist. Is it? Vexthel asked. Or is it the most effective military philosophy in the galaxy? He gestured toward the display one more time. I have analyzed the combat effectiveness of every species in the Coalition. None of them approach human performance levels when defending their homeworld. The alien officers began to whisper among themselves. The certainty that had carried them across space was crumbling as they realized the implications of what they were hearing. General, Commander Zektar said slowly, are you saying that we should be concerned about the upcoming battle? I am saying, Vexthel replied, that we should be terrified. The ancient warrior moved to the center of the room, his presence commanding absolute attention. We are not approaching a world filled with weak, frightened creatures. We are approaching a planet of potential heroes who have had 3 months to prepare for our arrival. But General, protested a young Keth drone, we outnumber them 100 to 1. Our technology is centuries more advanced. How can they possibly resist us? Vexthel looked at the drone with eyes that had seen the fall of empires. Because, young one, they are not fighting to win. They are fighting to become the heroes their children will sing about. He turned to address the entire room. Every myth they tell, every legend they preserve, every impossible story they teach their young, it all serves the same purpose. It prepares them for the moment when ordinary beings must do extraordinary things. What do you recommend, General? Asked Zektar. I recommend that we prepare for casualties unlike anything in Coalition history, Vexthel replied grimly. I recommend that we expect every human to fight like they're mythical heroes, and I recommend that we hope our own courage is sufficient for what we are about to face." The briefing ended in troubled silence. As the alien officers filed out, their excited chatter replaced by worried murmurs, Jake remained behind with his guards. For the first time in months, he felt something like hope. General Vexthal approached him as the room emptied. "Tell me, Captain Morrison," the ancient warrior said quietly, "what will your people do when we arrive at your homeworld?" Jake looked up at the being who had finally understood what humanity really was. "They'll do what humans always do when someone threatens. Their families, General. They'll become the heroes from our stories." Vexthal studied the human's face for a long moment. "That," he said finally, "is exactly what I am afraid of." As the Coalition fleet continued its approach to Earth, the mood aboard the ships had changed. Completely. What had begun as a celebration of anticipated victory had become a nervous preparation for a battle that might cost them everything. And in the depths of space, Earth waited for them, its people ready to prove. The Coalition fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, expecting to find a broken world waiting for conquest. Instead, they found something that made even the bravest alien warriors pause in shock. Earth was ready for war. Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of her rebuilt flagship, the UES Vengeance, watching the alien fleet approach. Around her, the largest human armada ever assembled waited in formation. Ships that had been built in the 3 months since the first battle, vessels pulled from every corner of human space, an experimental craft that existed only because desperate engineers had worked around the clock to create them. "Admiral," reported Captain Kevin Walsh from the communications station, "all ships are reporting ready. The Mars defense grid is online. Luna Base confirms missile batteries are armed and targeting." Lisa nodded, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. The alien fleet was massive, but humanity was no longer the same species that had been caught off guard 3 months ago. Earth had united in a way that had never happened before. Every nation, every corporation, every individual had contributed to the defense effort. "Signal all ships," Lisa ordered. "Today we find out what we're really made of." Aboard the Nexus Prime, General Vexthal studied the human formation with growing concern. The aliens had expected to find scattered resistance, maybe a few desperate ships trying to delay the inevitable. Instead, they faced an organized fleet that showed no signs of fear. "General," Commander Zektar said, his voice tight with worry, "the human fleet is larger than our intelligence predicted. They appear to have tripled their forces since our last engagement." "Impossible," protested a Kelran officer. "They don't have the industrial capacity to build so many ships in 3 months. Vexthal studied the tactical readouts with ancient eyes that had seen countless battles. "They do if every human on their world worked together toward a single goal. The question is not how they built these ships. The question is what they are willing to sacrifice to use them." The answer came. Quickly, the first wave of human fighters swept toward the alien fleet like a swarm of angry insects. But these were not the same pilots who had fought 3 months ago. These were men and women who had spent every waking hour training, studying alien tactics, and preparing for this moment. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Phillips led the attack in his modified fighter, the name Achilles painted on its side in bright blue letters. Behind him flew pilots with ships named Thor, Hercules, Wonder Woman, and dozens of other mythical heroes. It was not a coincidence. "Remember," Ryan's voice crackled over the radio to his squadron, "we're not just pilots today. We're the heroes our kids will read about in history books. Make it a good story." The human fighters hit the alien formation with a fury that shocked the Coalition forces. These were not the desperate, panicked attacks they had faced before. These were coordinated strikes by pilots who fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to prove. "Sir," a terrified Vorthok gunner reported to Commander Zektar, "the human fighters are not following standard attack patterns. They're making impossible maneuvers." On the tactical display, Zektar watched human pilots perform feats that violated everything he knew about aerial combat. Ships diving through crossfire that should have destroyed them instantly. Pilots ramming alien vessels when their weapons failed. Fighters continuing to attack even after taking damage that should have forced them to retreat. They fight like they're mythical heroes, General Vexthal observed grimly. Just as I feared they would. The battle escalated as the main fleets engaged. Human capital ships moved into formation with a precision that spoke of months of intensive training. The UES Vengeance led the charge, its guns firing in patterns that seemed almost artistic in their deadly beauty. Captain Sarah Mitchell, commanding the heavy cruiser Spartan, found herself facing 3 alien ships at once. Her vessel was outgunned and outnumbered, but she had something the aliens didn't expect. She had a crew that believed in legends. "All hands," Sarah announced over the ship's intercom. "This is our Thermopylae moment." 300 Spartans held a pass against impossible odds. Today we find out what 300 humans can do in space. The Spartan charged directly into the alien formation, its guns blazing. The ship took hit after hit, systems failing all across the vessel, but it never stopped fighting. When the main engines were destroyed, the crew used maneuvering thrusters to keep attacking. When the primary weapons failed, they switched to backup systems. When those failed, they rammed the nearest alien ship. The destruction of the Spartans sent shockwaves through both fleets, but for different reasons. The aliens were horrified by the human willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. The humans were inspired by proof that their heroes could be real. Meanwhile, on the surface of Earth, the ground war had begun. Alien troops had managed to land despite the fierce space battle, and they expected to face demoralized human forces. Instead, they found something that would haunt their nightmares forever. Sergeant Maria Santos held a defensive position outside New York City with just 12 soldiers under her command. They faced an alien assault force of over 300. By every tactical analysis, they should have been overrun in minutes. 2 hours later, Maria was still fighting. Her ammunition was gone, but she fought with captured alien weapons. Her squad was down to 4 people, but they held their ground. When alien reinforcements arrived, expecting to find their comrades victorious, they found human soldiers who refused to accept defeat. "This is impossible," radioed an alien field commander to his superiors. "These humans fight like they cannot be killed." "They can be killed," replied his superior, "but they fight like it doesn't matter." The same scene played out across the globe. Human forces, vastly outnumbered and outgunned, held positions that should have fallen within hours. They fought with a determination that the aliens had never encountered before. Every human soldier seemed to believe that they were personally responsible for saving their world. Back in space, the battle reached its climax as Admiral Carter led a desperate assault on the alien flagship. The Vengeance, heavily damaged but still fighting, broke through the alien defensive line and headed straight for the Nexus Prime. "Admiral," called out her tactical officer, "we're taking massive damage. Hull breaches on 17 decks. We can't survive much more of this." Lisa looked at the image of the alien flagship growing larger on her screen. "We don't need to survive. We just need to prove a point." The Vengeance smashed through the alien escort ships like a battering ram. Every weapon on the ship fired continuously, creating a cone of destruction that cleared a path to the enemy command vessel. The human crew worked at their stations even as explosions rocked the ship around them on the bridge of the Nexus Prime. General Vexthal watched the approaching human ship with something like admiration. "They really are going to do it," he said quietly. "They are going to become their own legends?" Commander Zektar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. "The human ship is destroyed. It cannot possibly still be functioning." "And yet it approaches," Vexthal observed. "Just like their myth said it would?" The Vengeance slammed into the side of the Nexus Prime with enough force to shake both ships. Human Marines, led by Colonel Alex Johnson, poured through the breach like ancient warriors storming a castle. They fought through the alien ship's corridors with a ferocity that terrified their enemies. "Sir," an alien security officer reported to Zektar, "the humans have reached Deck 7. Our forces cannot stop them. They fight like beings possessed." "No," Vexthel corrected, "They fight like heroes." There is a difference. The final confrontation came when Colonel Johnson and his remaining Marines reached the bridge of the alien flagship. They faced General Vexthel himself, the coalition's greatest warrior. In single combat, the ancient alien was stronger, faster, and more experienced than any human. His weapons were more advanced, his armor more protective. By every measure, he should have won easily, but Alex Johnson was not fighting just for himself. He was fighting for every human child who had ever heard a story about heroes. He was fighting for every legend that had ever inspired someone to do more than they thought possible. He was fighting to prove that myths could become reality when people believed in them strongly enough. The battle was fierce and deadly. Both warriors pushed themselves beyond normal limits, each representing everything their species could achieve. In the end, it was not superior strength or advanced technology that decided the outcome. It was the simple human refusal to give up. Even when defeat seemed certain, when the fight ended, General Vexthel lay defeated, but his ancient eyes showed respect rather than anger. "You have proven your point, human," he said quietly. "Your myths are real because you make them real." The coalition fleet began to withdraw, but not in victory. They retreated in shock and fear, having learned that some species could not be conquered, because they refused to believe that conquest was possible. As the alien ships disappeared into hyperspace, Admiral Carter received a final transmission from General Vexthel. The ancient warrior's message was brief but carried implications that would echo across the galaxy. "The humans do not create myths about warriors and heroes because they are weak," the message said.